acknowledge that we live and work in Mi'kma'ki as a steward of the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We are all treaty people. Could I get an approval of the agenda?
So moved.
Moved by Warden Weber.
Second.
Second by Councillor Church. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. All right. The minutes have been circulated. Can I get a motion for approval? What? Now, were they?
Were they circulated? No.
Were they not?
They'll have to be deferred.
Yeah,
Okay.
they'll follow.
Well, then we'll kill that. Moving on. 'Cause we didn't pay much attention. None of us. Good enough. All right. So we have two topics. We're going to first talk about the proposed video. Did I miss something?
No, video is good.
Oh, right. You're right. Yes, that's right. We lost somebody very important in our community last week. Carol Noss. She's been here in a variety of capacities over the years. I've known her since my time, since 2012, and those who've been around longer than me have known her. She's been an incredible champion for our community, for community building, and basically recording our history of this place. And she's gone from us now, and she'll be missed. I don't know, Councillor Bremner, if you wanted to say a couple things. Yeah, I guess I should turn you on.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I also share those sentiments. Carol has been a lifelong friend for me and most of us, has been such a champion for the history and the communications and the visitations of people and getting it written down. And, you know, I talked to her family just the other day, and just the day before, she was still writing notes and doing things on what she wanted to see and what she wanted us all to carry on. So I have sent my condolences, and I know I speak for lots of folks, and we will miss her. Thank you.
Yeah. It's sad. All right, now we can move on to, I guess, topic one, which is our proposed video surveillance policy. And who's leading that?
I think
Aaron is? Okay, great. I can turn on Aaron here.
Okay, so we have some proposed content for a video surveillance policy for council's direction today, as well as some potential locations where we could consider putting up video surveillance around the municipality. So first I'll walk through the policy pieces. The purpose of it is really to provide, it's to balance a couple of things. So it's public safety as well as privacy of the individuals who may be caught on surveillance, and then to enhance safety and security for employees, public, and property as well. Some of the principles around this policy are transparency and accountability, and of course being compliant with our regulations that we fall under, which is FOIPOP and the Municipal Government Act. And the proposed content is also based on guidelines from the province as well. We approached the development of this in terms of trying to minimize intrusion of privacy, as well as we're clear that it is only using overt surveillance, so non-secretive surveillance is considered. In terms of authorization and oversight, mainly the CAO is the authority that is the only position in the municipality that can authorize improving installations, unless, of course, it's directed by council via motion to put surveillance up somewhere else. We do have in the policy that it would require two assessments. One is a security threat assessment, and then second is a privacy impact assessment before the installation would be approved. And the oversight of design and installation is conducted by Information Services as well as the CAO office. So some of the guidelines around design is the cameras will be positioned to avoid private dwellings. There'd be no audio recording, so the current cameras that we have up now do not record audio. No monitoring of areas with expectation of privacy, of course, so washrooms and change rooms. 24/7 operation is possible, and the access to the video surveillance records would be restricted to authorized personnel that would be approved by the CAO. Where there is surveillance, we would put signage up at all of the locations so everyone is aware that that location is being surveilled. And the signs would state certain things like the legal authority, the purpose, and then any contact information for any questions that the public may have. The use of video records are around mainly, as I indicated earlier, safety and security of employees, contractors, and the public, as well as property. If criminal activity occurs and it happens to be captured on camera, then it could be used by law enforcement as well, so we would support them in their efforts on that. Could be used to investigate bylaw violations and workplace incidents and managing risk. Custody and access, again, would be approved by the CAO and mainly managed by Information Services. And then retention and disposal, routine footage would be retained for 30 days at a maximum, but if footage is needed for any type of investigation, the minimum amount that it would be retained is a year. And finally, on the policy piece, in terms of transition and compliance, because we do have existing surveillance up, we would have in the policy that all existing systems would be brought into compliance within a year. And then this policy, if adopted, would be replacing our current surveillance policy, P50. All right, public locations. So we have outlined the existing locations of surveillance right now. So all front counters in the municipal buildings, the scale house at Kaiser Meadow, one to surveil the scales and one to surveil the gates. Public drop-off at Kaiser Meadow and camera in lobby area in the upstairs main building. Some potential future sites would include the rest of the municipal buildings and facilities, public washrooms such as Wild Rose Park, and parks, trails, and playgrounds. So pending council's feedback today, next steps would be to bring back policy in its draft format for first reading or first notice at a future council meeting. Then we would develop those procedures, which would be those two assessments. And the CAO would then have authority to approve locations once the policy is in place. Any questions?
Councillor Church,
Thank you, Warden.
Deputy Warden.
Deputy Warden, sorry, slip up. I'll just say, I think it's a good idea. We need this policy, but I wouldn't want to see cameras everywhere. I don't think we need them everywhere. I know we have a few areas that have difficulty, like Wild Rose Park, the washroom. So I'm wondering, would we be able to put a camera inside? Because that's where the damage happened. You know, I know it'll be, have one on the outside is good, but it's really on the inside where the damage occurred. So I'm wondering if that can happen.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, no, we've discussed it. Wild Rose is definitely one of the locations on the list because of the two incidents that have occurred there. So I'll address the two parts of the question. The easy one to address is, no, we can't put them on the inside of the bathroom, and we wouldn't do that. We would put them on the outside. That would give us the surveillance we would need, that if something happened, we would be able to see who went in and out. But for privacy reasons, we wouldn't be able to put them on the inside of the bathrooms. The other piece around not making sure that they're not everywhere, that's why we have the two pieces of review that we do before. So there's a privacy impact, and I can't remember what the other one is called, but there's two reviews that we would do ahead of time. And so the criteria we would be looking at is not just, is there a possibility that something happened, but like, have incidents happened, how frequent is it?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So it wouldn't be a, let's put them up everywhere because something potentially could theoretically someday happen.
Yeah,
I think that would be overkill for us, and that just isn't something we're looking to do. We don't want to live in a security state, right? So we've had a discussion at the management level that it would be based on like actual instances that have happened or high risk areas, very high risk areas, right? That type of stuff.
I would be comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Councillor Asif?
Thank you. Yeah, just speaking on Wild Rose, and you know, we've got a considerable investment there as well. And I think that those would, you know, that's an easy, because we know with the incidents are there, I mean, the last one was terrible. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I fully agree with, like, I don't know when we can implement it, but we have to change the policy first, is that right, Kara?
Yeah, we have to, so we'll get direction today, we'll come back with a draft policy. We've got something drafted now, we just wanted to ensure that we have all the components that council's concerned about, that the policy reflects. So that's why we brought it here today, so that when we bring it back, it reflects your wishes and your intentions. And then we would, so normal policy procedure, we would do notice to adopt and then adoption a week later. So we could have something in place theoretically by the mid-February, early February. We should be able to bring something back. And then it's just a matter of making sure we have the budget for the cameras and figuring out, you know, that we've got all the administrative pieces in place. So we have the tools for the threat assessment and the privacy assessment. We have those in place, so we would have to run the sites through those and purchase the cameras and get them installed. So easily by spring, we should have most of this up and running. Yep.
Counselor Asif?
Yeah, just to that point, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I know the staff had mentioned to me that, you know, when we shut the washroom down this year, there's gonna be a lot of repair done, and I'd hate to see all the repair done and not have that in place, so hopefully that'll work. Yeah, thank you.
If I can, I think that if we really want to have a fulsome discussion prior to you developing the policy, I think we should have a little more information right now on what it is that you expect to consider when you do your security threat assessment and your privacy impact assessment. You know, to me, that's, I think everybody at a high level would want to have some, obviously, appropriate amounts of security and, you know, all that stuff. That's pretty, if that's what we're here to discuss, I mean, that's kind of a non-discussion. Like, so really, if you want to have a fulsome discussion today, we should be talking about what it is that you plan to consider. So, let's go.
Bruce is here. Are you ready to talk about
Hope so.
the things that are in the,
Go get it.
Assessment with me, but essentially it asks.
can you come, it's just for the mic, that's all.
If you keep this too high level, we're gonna have a 3-second discussion. Yeah, sure, sounds like a good idea, which is obviously what we wanted, because that's what led us to this place. If we wanna have a proper discussion, we need to talk about what's in that, because that's the crux of the whole thing. What is gonna be considered?
It attempts to ask two questions. One, is there a threat? Define it, and what is the extent of the threat? If you've had a number of incidences or there's a demonstrable threat to staff or property, it goes through a series of questions on that to analyze or to evaluate that extent of the threat. The second question it asks is there another way to achieve the same goal or to resolve the issue? Could be anything from placing a security guard there or having a patrol or whatever versus a camera. So it attempts to balance that out and then comes to a final discussion on the camera itself and the balance between privacy and threat resolution.
Yeah, so since we're here in this very expensive meeting, we'll just continue to ask questions. Like, what do you call a threat? Like you say, to property or to staff? What about, is this public property, private property? There's a difference between, like surveilling our washrooms in Wild Rose Park, you know, where we don't want to have damage done by people, but what about, say, Red Cross Wharf, where, you know, people could be stealing others, like, they're not our dinghies. We supply the facility, and then people could be stealing dinghies, do we care about that? Like,
Policy is only for municipal property. And based on the legal review, any property that we control, through, not necessarily own, but control.
I think
That's
the
what
Red
the
Cross
policy
Wharf,
is
for
limited
example,
to.
is an interesting case study because we provide a facility and the expectation is people will use it to put their property, their private property there. You know, it's
Yeah.
unlikely that we would have damage to our facility, but it's quite likely or even possible that, that people there could be theft and what does the public expect us to do around that, you know? I think that's an important discussion to have.
Based on legal, I would refer to
That might
Sam,
be-
that basically it would be a matter of defining what we would be in control of.
Yeah, we have authority of
yeah.
jurisdiction, so in
Yeah.
that instance, if it's a theft of a boat, for example, the authority would be the police. So it would be an RCMP investigation where if we had decided and went through the assessments that we needed it on the wharf, and we own the wharf, then it would be on there, but in terms of authority of jurisdiction of boat theft, that wouldn't be something that we'd be responsible for
No,
surveilling.
but one of our goals here apparently is to support law enforcement. So if the camera picked up theft, damage to boats, anything of that nature, that's the kind of stuff we just pass on to the police.
If the camera was placed there for our property surveillance, but we wouldn't, I don't believe, consider putting a camera there just to surveil on behalf of the
Oh, no,
RCMP.
no,
Yeah,
but we're gonna put it there.
yeah,
But
If it's there
but it's gonna
anyway.
pick up, damage to private property,
Yeah.
theft of private property, so I think we're gonna pass it, or the police are gonna come to us. They're gonna get a report that a dinghy's been stolen. They're gonna say, we know you've got a camera. Can we take a look at it?
yeah.
In that case, the policy says, and it's outlined, that they would make that formal request, which is their right.
So Bruce is, I don't think he'll pick it up live if it's not.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, in the policy, it makes provision for that if there is, but it's a formal request by the RCMP to release those records, and that would be a decision of the CAO to release or not.
Councilor
Yeah,
Bremner.
Yeah, I was gonna say, or they'd get a warrant.
Yeah, that's,
Councilor Bremner.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I hope we don't get in the weeds on this because it can get carried away. This, in my understanding, is municipal sites. I can speak for the district I represent. We have noted to have 6 concerning sites that have had either damage or fires that have cost us money. And they've cost us, in some cases, a lot of money. I think the public is looking for us to make sure we don't continue to lose repetitively. And this is the most common step that I know that's happening across the world. No, I'm not in favor of putting up hundreds and hundreds of cameras, but I think there's locations at all of our districts that do need that for our staff, do need that for our property of the taxpayer, and do need that to be modernizing where we're moving forward. If we go right back to our very basics, our growth in the future, we're going to have that to be able to sustain. Do we need things? I've had 2 examples in my head just in the last month when I was asked, when did something occur? I can't remember, I don't know. But if we had a surveillance of our property, particularly a wharf, we would know what that happened. So again, as you say, that area that you mentioned, Deputy Warden, that has been a concern for issues. And that has to be thought of. And I think as a council, I am in favor of looking at this policy and moving forward with it, again, to protect and to invest for our protection. Because we're moving forward in a modern way. We can't stay the way we were. We can't just trust this person's gonna tell us or that person's gonna tell us. Because this, again, going back to what the Deputy CAO says, is to assist other agencies as well in their, when they ask us a question, we can say, yes, we do, instead of, well, we don't. Thank you.
Yeah, I feel like our policy should somehow also reflect or have some sort of checkbox for the public's expectation of security. So if you're bringing your own personal private property and you're entrusting it to the municipality, then I think there's an expectation that there's gonna be some level of security there. Like, and no different than if you tie your dinghy, like I'm gonna use this word, if you tie your dinghy to the float, you expect the float to stay there, not float away into the ocean. There's an expectation. You also expect that it's gonna be secured, that, you know, we're gonna do what we can to make sure that it won't be stolen or whatever. Like those, I feel like those are rudimentary expectations that the public would expect if they're interfacing with our property. And there may be other, I'm using this as an example, but there may be other places that there would be an expectation of the public to have security. And I feel like that should be, if we're gonna consider, you know, we're gonna use like a decision tree to figure out which properties we're gonna apply this policy to and which ones we're not. I think that should be, my personal, that should be part of it.
Just to clarify a little bit, that would be for municipal properties under our control, is that? Yeah.
I think what I'm hearing is we might need to tweak the policy a little bit so that it's broader than just municipal property, that it's also on, so the cameras would be on municipal property, but they could be towards an area where it's public property, but not necessarily under our control, like the wharf. And and the finger wharves, I think, are ours anyways, are they not? Yes, so that would be municipal property anyway, so I think it would work for that. But I think we can probably that's why we're here, right? That's why we want to have this discussion, so that we can hear what council's intention is and we can tweak that policy, so we can go back and look at that and make sure that that situation would be covered, I think.
We may also look at adding that into the security assessment.
Yeah, that's exactly what we would need to do. And the other thing that we should mention is that the policy, although it's based on like the security assessment or the threat assessment and the privacy assessment, and then it's up to myself as CAO to approve those locations. There's also as it's drafted right now, when you see it, it'll come back to you with a piece in there that upon motion of council, additional sites can be approved. So just to give some of that flexibility where something may not fit tightly or neatly into the sort of box that we've created, but it allows council some ability to be flexible. Yeah.
Any other thoughts? Remember, they're gonna take this discussion and this is what they're gonna draft their policies. So next time it'll be in black and white, so this is your chance. That's it? All right. All right, next up, Tim. All right, financial reserves policy. This is usually hard to sleep tonight after we talk about this.
That's why we have these meetings in the morning.
You have time to calm down.
So I guess similar to the last item, we're looking at, we're working on developing a policy, and before we bring back a draft for that first notice, we'd like to get a little bit of feedback from council on a few of the things that are going to go into this policy. I know we've had a few discussions in the past about progressing from the old state to the new state, and we've kind of made a few steps intermediary, but we're looking to, finally formalize it all in this new policy. So in your agenda today, there's sort of three documents. One is the request for direction, which is a little more detailed. There is the presentation that we'll see on the screens that kind of summarizes that detailed presentation. I've also included an attachment which kind of summarizes the proposed details of each of the reserves as we have them sorted out so far. So basically the point of this today is I'd like to get some feedback on some specific reserves, and in particular how they will affect operations, and how council feels that we should be as an organization dealing with that operational impact of reserves and how the reserves can serve the desired operations and funding of various groups and things like that. Also an opportunity to review those proposed details for each one's balances, all that, and give some feedback. Some background context, obviously our reserves are established under various legislation, MGA, Financial Reporting and Accounting Manual, other motions of council, needs of operations and capital purchases. In February of this year, we had that first discussion where we did things like carving out some pieces from the general operating reserve to create the solid waste operations reserve, to create that municipal lending reserve for the PACE program and the water and septic systems. And we also replaced the wind energy reserve with the more specific community development, economic development reserves. And we formalized the asset retirement obligations reserve for the landfill and the other asset retirement obligations. Some other adjustments that we've actually been making, to the scope of this work since that discussion is the industrial park development reserve. That was something that council directed us to develop back in April of 2023. It was just missed in that first round, so that is included in scope going forward with this policy. As well as a second asset retirement obligations reserve. This one is a little bit wonky, just in review of the MGA and FRAM requirements and then in discussion with some representatives of the province to get clarity around what they intended there. We discovered that we do have to maintain the landfill ARO as its own distinct sub-reserve, and then the other ARO is going to be a second reserve. Again, kind of wonky stuff. So policy development so far, we've gone through with our, I guess now former policy analyst, helped us draft the reserve policy. And right now, again, we're focusing on those details that are included in that matrix. This is really where we're getting into the meat of things. Okay, so into the discussion of the particular reserves that we're looking for feedback around today. So the Parkland Reserve, which is a capital reserve funded from contributions from developers and the subdivision fees. And this is a reserve that is required under the MGA to be used for the acquisition and capital improvements to parks, playgrounds, and other similar purposes, public purposes, with a clarification that interest on these funds can be used for operations and maintenance of those facilities. The balance of that reserve at the opening of this fiscal year was around $343,000. So the input, and I'm going to go through each of these. I'm not going to stop and get input on each individual because they do kind of relate to each other. So I'm just going to go through them and then we can get the feedback after that. So the input we would be looking for on this one is to whether to just maintain it as is stipulated, or to broaden or narrow its scope. For example, council may wish to say this is only for acquisition or this is only for improvements if you wanted to further refine. As long as it meets the MGA requirements, it would be fine. However, we do kind of expect that this reserve in some form or another will continue on due to those requirements.
I know you want to go through them all and then talk about it, but it may be a challenge for us to sort of come back.
Well, in particular, this one and the next one are kind of intimately related, and the solution might be some combination of things. That's why I kind of want to do that.
It may be also helpful for the committee if you also gave us some ideas what in the past we've been using this for.
Yeah, for sure. So this one more recently has been used to budget for some of the open space improvements. I can't remember off the top of my head right off the bat, but I think some of the work at the Hahn property is currently budgeted out of this reserve.
That gazebo thing, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's the piece. There hasn't been a whole lot of use. It is a fairly small balance. It's been growing a little quicker in recent years, so it's kind of increasing in size, and it will, we kind of anticipate with some changes to subdivision fees, that it will increase at a greater rate going forward. So it's good to kind of focus on what we want this reserve to do as it becomes a little more relevant to the financial planning and budgeting. The next one on the list here is the recreation reserve. This is another capital reserve that has a very small balance of about $50,000. Historically, it's been used for kind of general recreation facility needs. It was initially established with the leftovers from some funding for building the skate park. There is no ongoing funding source for this reserve. It just sort of sits there earning a small amount of interest and not really getting used for much in recent years. So part of that, and because it generally kind of overlaps with that previous parkland reserve, I think want to get council's idea as to whether they think there's an interest in just consolidating those and calling them all to cover that, acquisition and improvement of these parks, playgrounds, and similar purposes. Like a skate park is absolutely one of those similar purposes. Or if there was some interest in doing something else, maybe specifying this reserve to cover rec facilities that might be not those open outdoor spaces. And then if you were going to do that, you might want to identify ongoing funding source opportunities, that kind of thing.
Okay. Well, we got the CAO.
I just wanted to jump in real quick, and you may have said it and I missed it. For the or for the parkland reserve piece of it, so the way our subdivision bylaw is set up right now, cash in lieu is not required. So the developers can choose whether they want to do cash in lieu or whether they would like to do dedication of a piece of land. Typically, we get the land rather than the cash in lieu. As we go through subdivision review and we look at our subdivision bylaw, there is the ability to flip that to require the cash in lieu that is a way that council, if they chose to do that, that is a way that you could fund this reserve. And you'd see that reserve balance come up much faster than it has been, because we would be requiring the cash in lieu as opposed to making it optional.
Yeah.
And so they generally don't they take advantage of providing the land rather than
That we
the
don't
cash
even
in lieu.
want or need.
Yeah, and the logic there is a lot of the time that land is not really useful for developing parkland. It's just whatever low-value land a developer can offer to reduce the cost to their work. So,
Hang on, Warden Weber?
Well, I don't, yeah, I mean, and I think that we should probably change that policy so that we can take the cash instead of land that we don't want in the first place. But secondly, it makes no sense to keep two separate reserves, especially this one that deals with the skate park. I mean, there's no money going in there or anything like that. Why not put it all in the same one? Because we can use it for all those purposes anyway. So I don't see the point in having two of them.
yeah, and really, we can get into that conversation now, since these two are the ones that are related. The next one is sort of its own standalone thing, so it might be a good time for that conversation. I think that would be my recommendation, if I was to make one, would be to consolidate them as a single reserve, and you've got an established funding source, you've got legislated purpose, and then it also could be used for pretty much everything this reserve has been used for.
Yeah, if I can jump in, if you think about where the funding for this comes from, obviously it's coming from development. It's a tax on developers, essentially. And so I don't know if that informs this committee on how it would want to apply the funds, in some way, because in theory, if you were creating new development, you're growing the community out, let's say it was starting to grow in a certain direction, do you want to try to reapply those funds in an area? Because as communities grow out, you want to provide recreation opportunities to those new communities, maybe. Or maybe you don't want any guardrails on it. Maybe it's just like you could use it anywhere. You could use it for trail work or whatever, or a new bridge or whatever. I don't know. What does this committee want to do with these? Do you want a framework around what you do with these recreation reserves, or should it be just a free-for-all for anything recreation? Knowing that the only place this money is really coming from is new development. So new communities that weren't there before, new lots, new homes, that's where the money comes from. Every new lot that wasn't there before, there's a little part of that cost that turns into this reserve. And so how do you want then to reinvest? In theory, if you're being taxed, it's no different I guess, than, what's the name of that one there on hotels or whatever? It's,
Marketing levy.
the marketing levy on hotels, and the idea is that you take it off of room rates and then it gets reinvested into, marketing for those same hotels or whatever. But here we're taking money from development, that's where it's coming from, it's express purpose. Now, do you want then to use that to provide recreation opportunities to support new development, or do you want to just be able to do it wherever? That's an open discussion. I know historically, this council has always wanted, or our previous councils have always wanted just to have no unfettered access to whatever money for any purpose, but sometimes, councils change and people's, they'll look back on these guidelines and think about what was the purpose of this and why are we doing this, and so we should, I feel like at least, even if it's not rigid, we should have at least some sort of guiding principle or something. Because when staff go and access this money and make the recommendation, it's going to be based on whatever we, as a committee or a council, decide. So, anyways, I say enough. Warden Weber.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind some guidelines on that, but I mean, I think it should be pretty much open-ended for council to make that decision, because, if we're going to use, if all the money comes from development in New Ross, that doesn't mean we don't need to still have funds to maintain a significant rink complex or something, or boat launches, which they need as well, you know, so I don't think it should be all tied to the community it comes from, because we have all kinds of things all across the province that serve a lot of people. So I think there needs to be some flexibility.
Counselor Church.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I agree with Alan. I think I wouldn't like it restricted to specific areas. If we have a subdivision saying that we have to put something in that subdivision, say a playground, which may not even be requested. So I like the fact that we have some flexibility, and I think we can make the decision whether there's an area where something is needed. We're pretty open that way. We've used funds that came in from a subdivision in Hubbard's that goes to a project in New Ross, for example. So we have that ability to do that. So if we limit ourselves, we can't do that. I think we're good around this table of deciding, you know, an area where we need the money to be spent. So I wouldn't like it tied down.
Okay. Counselor Bremner.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I think, first of all, I join the two of them together, the recreation and the
That makes sense.
Parkland Reserve. It
Yeah.
just makes absolute, and when you look at what's under the Parkland Reserve, use of funds, acquire, improve parkland, playground, similar public purposes, I think it covers 90% of what we're chatting about. And I do believe when we talk about the health of folks, they want to have activities to do outside and areas to do things, or wherever, inside or outside. And I do believe this is for healthier communities, healthier people. You know, the green is important and the space is important. So I don't think we have to change a lot besides putting the two together and looking at what might be some modern steps of how that's acquired or how it's balanced off. But I think if we don't want to make it too complicated and we don't want to freelance, so thank you.
Just for the challenging this committee, I'll ask the question, why do we have this reserve at all? Why not just roll it into operating? And if we want to build a new rink or we want to build a new park, like why does it have to come from this little bucket? Like once we've taken the fees or whatever, like is there any reason to have, because we're only speaking today about a few reserves. We got a lot of them, a lot, probably more than I even know. And
They're all listed right there.
and you know, do we need all these little buckets, or like what's the point of it? You know, if it's going to be unfettered access and you're just going to be able to pick and there's no guardrails around what you use it for, you know, council can decide, you know, oh, it's vaguely recreation related, let's just pull it out of this, like why? Let me ask that question to this council.
I can answer that one.
Oh, please.
The Parkland Reserve is legislated to exist, right? The fees we receive from the subdivision stuff is required to be used for parks, playgrounds, or similar public purpose. So to clarify that, I heard a rink complex mentioned. This particular reserve would not qualify for that particular spending. And also, it's not to the magnitude that would be required for that kind of funding. But to your point, yes, there are significant other reserves. And this one is just a very tiny piece of it, but it is legislated, so there is specific needs there. If the costs for that work, as in, you know, playgrounds are expensive, especially if you're building a new one, right? So you're probably not gonna cover all the cost of all your parkland work that's required out of this one reserve, but it is required to be there to contribute to that work, right?
Oh, that's a good answer. Councilor Church.
Thank you. It is a good answer, and specifically, we use this fund to help purchase an island. So it's specific, and we didn't take that from operating. So it makes sense to me to leave the parkland and use it for what it is. I'm very much in favor of having it there for, you know, parkland public use. I think it's important. I wouldn't want it into general operating.
Great. All right, good.
Okay.
All right.
So before I move on, I'll just kind of summarize what I've heard here, is that we're interested in merging that recreation reserve into the Parkland Reserve, so we'll transfer those funds in there. It will be We are not interested in mandating locations or investment decisions in the policy, but rather leaving that as a more open decision for council to make as the needs of a community become more obvious.
And it sounds like there are already guardrails around what it can be used for in the legislation.
There are specifics, yeah, it's not location focused, like if, I know you were talking a little bit about that.
I was just challenging the committee.
And yeah, no, that's a great discussion, right? I wanted to hear what people had to say about that, because if council was interested in applying that lens within the policy to stipulate that investments must occur within certain areas, that's something I would want to know. It sounds like that wasn't the interest here, so I'm not going to build that into the policy. If there's anything else I'm missing, I'm happy to hear it now, or we can move on to the next piece.
Yes, please.
Okay. The next one is the FHCS Equipment Reserve. This is another capital reserve with a tiny balance and no funding source, other than a small amount of interest earned over the years. The balance at the opening of this year was about $24,000. As you know, every time we go out to FHCS for a meeting, we tend to get a request that gets funded out of this reserve. But there's really no structure or governance that covers what it's used for, and there's really no additional funding source. So this is one where, I mean, obviously council has an interest in ongoing contributions to help these community schools and with community space and joint use. But this is an opportunity to sort of formalize that and make it a little more than just, well, we've got this tiny little bit of policy. Or other options, right? So obviously there's more than just one community school. Do you really want to name it after one community school? Is there an interest in broadening the scope of the work that kind of falls into this historically? Where is council feeling about that?
Does Warden Weber remember where this money originally came from? I wanted to put Warden Weber on the spot, man. You take my fun.
I was curious as to whether it was part of the agreement that we signed way back in the day.
Yeah, it was, so this is, so there's a couple of different things in here. Originally, it was set up as, specifically as FHCS, because that was our original community school. And so there was some remnant funding that was left over from that very initial partnership when the school first opened. And so we've been spending a little bit of that over the years.
So was
for
it a
example-
request that came in and said, we're gonna do a community school, and and the council of the day had to seed some sort of reserve with whatever, 100,000 or whatever it was?
Yeah, so
in the
council
day?
contributed towards specific elements of that school that were put in specifically for the community. So the community school coordinator office and an expanded facilities in the gymnasium and the locker room were made bigger. And so it was some of that work. And so some of the costs didn't come in to what they initially predicted. So there's a little bit of residual money that was left over.
And we put it in a reserve.
Yeah, so one of the other things that happened with this reserve is that actually all of that $24,000 isn't actually for Forest Heights. There was some money when we started ACES that started as well, and so instead of creating another separate ACES reserve, that money was all put into this one reserve. So approximately, I'm not sure the exact amount over there, but a little better than half of that is actually money that came from ACES that got put into that same location. So the question is, so we've been dipping into it a little bit. So just last week, council would have approved $3,500 towards some improvements in the gymnasium for new badminton standards. So as an example of how we have used it since that time. But the original, that original concept and the contribution towards the original community schools so it's essentially residual from that. So I know there's potential for projects to come up in the future. So I guess to Tim's point is, is council interested in having a specific reserve account? And that probably needs to look different than what it was originally, right? So we do have all 5 of our schools in the municipality are now community schools. So I would think to Tim's point is it probably shouldn't be labeled just FHCS. It should be for all of them. However, knowing that we need to be a little bit respectful of where some of that money came from originally. So what was designated for Forest Heights and ACES probably should maybe stay connected to those 2 schools, but going forward.
I question reserves that have no source of funding, that just eventually just wind down to nothing, and then what? Then we just throw more money in there from some other reserve?
Right, so we could,
What's the point of it?
Yeah, so we could, that is an option, I think, is to just get rid of this reserve, and going forward, if we have a capital project, it could be through the recreation reserve, or if we have capital project, gets put in the capital budget and we come up with another source of funds at that point in time.
Yeah, so there's a few options that could go different ways, right, depending on what council
Well,
wants to
just
see.
hang on here, we got Council Bremner
Oh, yeah.
wants to come in on us.
Thank you, Deputy. I think it's absolutely right. Join it with some other recreation opportunity. We have, what, 6 schools or something like that? We shouldn't be reserving just for 2. We should have a little bit for if someone else comes. I think where there's no incoming investment or anything coming from that, we just have to marry it with something and make it part of a closed up program that is not closed to operations, but closer to being a funded, balanced approach.
Can I ask a question? Are we allowed to take from the Parkland Reserve, for example? And like if there was a requirement to put new pickleball standards in one of our community schools, are we allowed to do that?
If it was the way I would interpret that, just off the cuff here, I want to dig in it further, would be if that's an outdoor space that could be considered similar to a playground or park. If it was like an indoor gymnasium focused thing, I don't think that the Parkland Reserve would qualify for that.
Has to be outside.
That's how I would interpret those words in the legislation. It says playgrounds, parkland, or other similar public purpose.
Well, that's pretty vague, that last part.
The similar is the piece I'm looking at. I don't read it, calling it parkland, right, kind of
If it has a roof over it, it's bad, it's not a park.
Well, unless it's a gazebo.
That's a different park amenity again.
Yeah, so there are some things that would fall under this that could theoretically be under the parkland. I wouldn't think that some of the stuff we've seen as requests for this reserve.
That's too
would
bad,
really
because
fit.
it would really clean everything up if everything recreation was
Yeah.
in one bin.
I think if this were to be, so you could, there's a few options. You could look at things like, just call this the community schools equipment reserve, and make it more clear that it's open for all community schools and allocate a funding source annually, a portion of some other reserve or whatever, like, some of the community development reserve gets allocated or some deed transfer tax or whatever, right? And then clarify what would make a school project eligible for this, similar to some of the outstanding grant programs of, there's an intake stream and there's criteria and all that, you could clarify that. Alternatively, speaking of the other grant funding streams, you could just roll this reserve up into some other capital reserve, get rid of it, and open up a new grant stream that goes right along with the community capital. That's another option that could be looked at. There's all sorts of kind of different things you could do. And wondering if council has any specific thoughts on that.
Well, let's hear from Councillor Coolin.
Oh, thank you. So currently, as it stands, if we change it to a community school, or just change the wording, $24,000 can get sucked up really quickly if it's proposed and goes in with another reserve, right? So in the past, have the other schools, other than ACES and Forest Heights, have utilized this monies? Are they they're not even aware that it exists, or?
No, so because that money was specific for those
For those two schools
it's
only?
just, it's only been used for those two schools.
However, ACES isn't on that actual title, so most people would assume that money is just for Forest Heights. I mean,
The label is a
it's the
little bit-
label, yeah. So that in turn has to change, whether or not it gets grouped in with another capital reserve. Definitely, if nothing else happens, the title has to change to at least community schools and make all schools aware that they can utilize this money.
Warden Weber.
Well, I mean, there's no money coming into this fund.
No.
So it's not gonna grow, it's just gonna get gone. So I don't see why we don't transfer it to a recreation grant program of some sort that can be used, whether it's indoors or outdoors. And if you have to change some wording in a recreation program grant to make it possible, then, but I don't see the point in maintaining, I mean, even though you say the money came from Forest Heights, but I mean, that was still our money, like it was.
Right.
It
So
wasn't.
can I ask the question then, why even create this bin? Like if for whatever reason we needed to improve the facility in Chester District School or some other school, then why wouldn't we just pull from one of our operating or whatever? These are small amounts of money. It's not like it's something you can't build a reserve up for because you have this huge capital request. We're talking, I would say in most cases, you would agree that these are very small amounts, like a few thousand here and there. we're not talking big $100,000, $200,000 purchases.
No, I think if there were large projects like that, that would probably be, it would probably be handled differently, because it's just, we don't have the capacity to look
It just
after it.
seems
So
like
if we had
just an insane thing to maintain this reserve. For what purpose? What's the purpose of having the reserve if we don't, it's not like we're saving up our money so that someday we can do this big project. It's just stuff that's like in the noise level in our
Yeah, so
budget.
if it goes away, then we just need to know, so if, it's just using Foresights as an example, if that same project came up in the future and there was a request for, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, cost shared with the school, then how would we be funding that? So right now, we would dip into this, so just going forward, we just have to know how council would like to handle those requests.
So we do the recreation grants.
Or whatever, I don't think it even matters. I don't even know if I gave it much thought. I think we just looked at the merit of the application and it's like, go find the money somewhere. So, but I mean, having all it always astonishes me how many little bins that we create to sort of try to justify our rationale for giving the money. It's like, oh, we have already allowed for that. So then it somehow makes us feel better that we've made the decision to fund it. Well, I think on the merit of the application, that's enough. Like where it comes from, the money, once we've decided, that's just a shell game, in my view, but I'll hear from the other committee members.
I agree.
Okay, so,
Put it somewhere else so we can use it.
Roll it into operating or whatever.
so with it being a capital reserve, there are some restrictions on that. If
Okay.
we were to shut this reserve down and roll that into another capital reserve, whether it's the general or whether it's the parkland, that would end this particular reserve. And then if there was, you wanted to clarify to Forest Heights or to ACES that there is still funding available, is there an interest in creating a more formalized stream for applying for funding, or would it still be that same ad hoc and just be sure that it's there?
I don't know if they
Yeah, so
I don't think we wanna invite them to spend more money.
Yeah, so typically these projects aren't a little different than the typical grant process. That usually if we have these projects that come up, they're usually discussed at the management committee level. And so there's a little bit of level of scrutiny before they would come to this council to actually ask for money. And so I would see, again, using that old example, I could see the project comes forward, the management committee discuss if it's seen as a viable project. Then it would come to council. Like it may be, if it's a larger project, we would hopefully plan in advance and build that into the budget, and then council would see that during budget deliberations. That would be my suggestion on how we deal with that, especially because they're capital. If it didn't happen during the budget cycle, then we would again come to council and ask for that to come from a specific other capital reserve.
We'll take the CAO and then maybe Councillor
Yeah.
Coolin.
So,
No,
I just want to jump in for 1 second, and Chad, you can clarify it. I think part of what we're hearing is open up a grant stream. I think the discussion you just had was based on, these requests don't come from the school themselves. They come from the discussion and the interaction with the community use piece of it. So our school community use coordinators would sort of be the ones who initiate these discussions and requests typically. And so if you were to put this into some other capital, then it would be probably, the way this would come forward would be the same way it would come from staff based on the work they're doing in the schools.
Yeah, I'll give you another example, just because examples usually help. So right now, I'll use Forest Heights as an example. We've been talking about looking at how the public enters the building. And so there's lower doors that go into the school by the gymnasium. Right now, those doors are locked, and so right now, the community comes in upstairs, but they can't come in through those bottom doors. Well, we're talking about potentially installing a key fob system that would allow certain community groups to come in through those doors and go immediately into the gymnasium. So if we were to install that, the estimate, I think, is around $5,000 or $6,000. So we would look to the school, they would contribute a little, and then they would come back to council and with that request for $4,000 or $5,000. And so we would either budget that if we could, or the request would come to council, and then you would find that through one of the other operating capital reserve.
Yeah, and I got a hard time, in my view, differentiating that from any other project that would be proposed by recreation staff.
Yeah.
And we'd put it in the budget for the following year, and it would be just another little project that would get done. Why is this any different?
So, yeah, and so the only reason it came out of this reserve before is just because it was
Because we
money
had
that
it,
was in it,
because we
was
had it.
residual money, because we
Free
had
money.
it. Yeah, so, yeah.
Yeah, just
Oh,
roll
my
it into
goodness.
one.
We're so funny.
So I would probably recommend rolling this fund into just the general capital reserve rather than the parkland, because the parkland is
Yeah.
much more restrictive and wouldn't cover things like access to a door, you know? So that's what I will take from this conversation. Great. The next piece is the fire services training reserve. This is an operating reserve that, again, has no ongoing funding source other than just the interest earned. Our recommendation as staff is to close that reserve, as that in recent years, all the work required for training tends to get budgeted by the fire departments. And if they request funding, there is funding from the operating reserve or from some other source. And so essentially we are recommending discontinuing this reserve as a standalone fund for simplicity and just because training expenses are generally budgeted annually or covered by operating reserve. So it really has reached the end of its usefulness, and we're recommending just rolling this into the general operating reserve.
Makes
Okay.
sense?
All right, so that's really the important, more critical stuff I wanted for drafting the policy. The next step is really to focus on, you know, that attachment, the matrix of the different reserves, just to kind of get an understanding if there's any interest in revising or asking questions about any of the proposed purposes, source of funds, use of funds, target balances is an important one. So for example, the target funds can impact operations and other funding stuff, like for example, the minimum target balance in the operating reserve. You set it higher, it kind of limits the ability to budget to use that fund for things. If you set it lower, it increases that ability but gives less cushion. If you wanted to set, it could change the amount of funds that are available for grant programs if you set the minimum balance higher on the community development reserve, for example. All these pieces are really, like, if you have some feedback now, I'm happy to hear it and would love to hear it. It's also stuff that will come back in a draft policy and that is fairly inconsequential to change at that time, so you're not locking in anything here the way that these bigger discussions around the establishment of reserves and such was. So again, if you want to look at the target balances that I've listed in that file, if there's any that you want to ask questions about or want to give some input on, similar that even the titles of reserves, the purpose, all that stuff, this is just sort of a general opportunity to give your feedback or ask questions about that stuff. Hearing,
Oh, hang on. Okay, Councillor Church.
Yeah, just one question. So now do we put a percentage in these funds? Or do
as
we
the
say?
limits, so I can go through some of the proposals. So a lot of them, I've really just sort of picked numbers. Like there
Okay.
isn't really a whole lot of thought into a lot of these. Now some of them, like for example the ARO, there's a stipulated required balance for those ones. I'm not really
Yeah.
expecting much there. But if you look at like some of the operating reserves, so like solid waste operating reserve or the sewer operating reserve, those are intended to sort of balance the operating costs of those functions. And a lot of other municipalities do things like setting it as a percentage of operating costs for the
Yes.
year. So right now I've got proposed, say, the solid waste operating reserve, set it as a minimum of 20% of annual operating costs. And then the maximum, I've got written in here, a higher percent of annual operating costs. Now that could impact the finances of the general rate, as in if you set the maximum balance at, if you set it really low and then
Yes.
stipulate in the reserve policy that any balance above that, you know, if the landfill's making operating gains each year and it's putting them in reserves and we get above that and you say, okay, we're gonna move that money to offset general rate or go to the general reserve, that could impact other, you know, tax rate setting stuff. So for example, if you set the solid waste operating reserve maximum at whatever percentage, 100% of annual operating funds or operating expenses, and then stipulate that anything above that would require adjusting that, you know, contribution back to the general rate, so that what we were calling the dividend last year, not truly a dividend, but sort of functionally like that, then that will impact your revenues into the general fund in a year. So that's one where there's some, you know, impact.
Can, because my memory is poor. And I realize it wasn't that long ago, apparently, that council made this decision. But can you walk us through the industrial park development reserve one more time here? I realize it's from 2023, but.
So that one, my understanding is funded through the proceeds of sale
I'm
of
sorry,
land.
I should have allowed Warden Weber to speak.
Oh, yeah.
He was ahead of me.
It's all similar. I mean, I guess I don't see making much change here. This is all part of the budget process. When you come back with the budget and you tell me what the tax rate is, then I'll decide whether I can put more money into reserves or not, you know, because.
Right,
you know.
yeah, and this is an opportunity really to kind of formalize the things that we would use to build that budget, right? Rather than having that individual discussion every year, there'd be kind of standards and minimums and maximums set that would feed that discussion.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, we just went through the recreation one, well, all the money that comes from the developments go into that, so that's a no-brainer, it is what it is, whatever it is. And the landfill closure costs, well, we're required to have that funded, so that's a no-brainer, we have to do it, you know, but when it comes to a lot of these other reserves, I mean, if you come back and tell me that the tax rate's gonna go up by 10 cents, then I'm probably gonna just cut some of the money that we're putting in reserves, or something, you know, like, you know, just because we don't want the tax rate. So I don't know, you can set all these figures, but it's still, I think that when we set the budget and determine the tax rate, we're gonna do what we believe is politically correct
And
and economically sound.
Yeah, and as, I know there's kind of a lot, you just look at some numbers and not really kind of absorb what the impact of that would be on first glance. So this is an opportunity to look at it. Like I said, we will bring back a draft policy, which will include all this stuff again, and it is fairly inconsequential to change those numbers at that time, if that's something that we've had time to think about more about the impact. So definitely not requiring any direction today on this, unless somebody had something that was really popping to the surface.
just the industrial park development reserve, I just can't remember why we were creating a reserve for that. I realize it wasn't that long ago, but,
Industrial Park Reserve,
In case we had to build a road.
okay.
yeah, so.
The deputy CEO has some ideas.
So that was created based on proceeds from sales of land at the Kaiser Meadow Industrial Park for them to go into a special reserve, those funds, in order to fund future investment in the development of the industrial park. So that was to just try and carve that out so that it would be dedicated to future infrastructure investments.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. So, to create the industrial park in the first place and put the roads and do the surveying and all the infrastructure that's in place, that money came from where? Operating or wherever?
I would assume it was just our operating at the time, yeah. And there hasn't been a ton, like, so most of the investment that's happened there has been based on the landfill development. And so we haven't really done a lot of, like, we haven't laid out roads or constructed roads for the industrial park itself. So there really hasn't been a ton of specific funding for the industrial park itself. I think there might have been the road out, the rainbow net and rigging, the road out to Sustain and rainbow net and rigging. That's probably the only investment that's happened there, and I don't know how long ago that was done, so, yeah.
I guess, and I can't remember, obviously I was part of the council that decided that, and I don't remember the discussion that led us to this point, but just reflecting on this idea now, you know, everything we've spent out there to develop the industrial park has come from, because we had no sales, come from, you know, our own reserves or other operating monies or whatever, and then somehow we feel like we need to set up a reserve then if we're gonna do more work, you know, and, you know, I just don't, why, what was the rationale there? That seems really, if, you know, since we're here talking about it, I'm just challenging staff and the committee here, like, what was the thinking there? I can't remember what it would have been.
It was,
Go ahead, memories.
It was just around carving out any funds that came out of sales of the land could be reinvested back into the park. So it was a way to protect that money for future investment into the park. So we have a small amount of income coming now in terms of lease revenue and internet revenue coming from tenants at the park. And then we did sell 4 acres. So that's when the discussion was held, was when we sold those initial 4 acres around the revenue from that.
And to clarify, the rent and lease funds, they're not going into this reserve.
No.
It's the sale of land that goes into this reserve.
Yeah.
And the sale of land proceeds have to go to capital reserves. That is a stipulation of the MGA. And so we've just clarified that this portion of capital reserves is specifically for offsetting the future costs of development of that property.
Specifically this property. I guess that's something that sort of I find a little strange, because, just me, we'll hear from the rest of the committee, I guess, but, you know, we took from other capital reserves presumably to do it in the first place, and then when we get a little bit of, finally get a little bit of return, it's like, no, we're not gonna replenish the thing that we took from. We're gonna put it in this other little bin. It, kinda like, why?
I would have to go back and read previous documents.
Yeah,
But
well,
I kind of
I feel like
interpret
that's
that.
I feel like, you know, we should revisit that. I don't understand why we would, because we create these constructs and then future councils are like, why does this even exist?
The way I would interpret that is to avoid having to dip into other funds for future infrastructure upgrades. To prevent that same thing from having to happen is to have this fund set aside so that you're not saying, well, we've got to develop a new road. Let's fund it from that other general source. We now have that specific fund.
How much
But,
is in there right now?
I don't have that number off the top of my head because that was one that was sort of sitting there.
80,000.
It's from just that one sale.
Yeah.
So that ain't gonna go very far.
Yeah,
So we're gonna be dipping in anyway if we do anything of any significance.
yeah, I don't know. I would imagine you'd expect there to be more need applied before we're looking at future development stuff there, right? Like the sale of one lot is not driving the need for more development, but if we were to sell 10, there may be.
You'd need to spend a couple $100,000.
I couldn't say what we would have to spend, but yeah.
Homes and stuff.
Yeah. Anyway, it just, sometimes we create these complicated structures and it's with good intentions, and then if you reflect on it when the emotion hasn't gripped you later, and then suddenly it's like, well, why? This makes no sense. I've seen it 100 times, especially in my personal life. Please. Oh, Councilor Bremner, thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I think what I'm hearing is, and you said it yourself, the councils past had different views and different thoughts and felt that placing money in certain areas was the appropriate thing to do. Well, 10 years later, 5 years later, 1 year later, here we are looking at a different world again. And I think our financial expert has said, often we go to the operational reserve and others that are already there and don't actually go to these specific spots. So I think simplifying, streamlining, processing to, yeah, exactly, processing to the same, to an understandable, clearer system with some guidelines. I obviously recognize that has to happen, than just having 100 of them when we could do with 50 or 20 or whatever the magic number is. Makes a lot more sense today. And I think the change in council with the views looking differently, that is an appropriate thing for now. What happens in the future, that's another council's decision. Thank you.
You know, there's some really, I think, in my view, good reserves in here. Like, the municipal lending programs reserve makes perfect sense, you know? That could be a big number. It's if you're in a financial institution, they have something called the allowance, because there's a certain number of loans that go defunct, you know, and you have to have an allowance. You put aside a certain allowance every quarter in case those loans go bad, and you can cover that because it's a big shock to the system and there's regulatory requirements to do so. This is no different. We know that there's going to be a certain amount of uptake. Makes sense to have some sort of reserve there for that. That's really easy. But I would challenge staff personally that we have focused on the FHCS equipment reserve, recreation reserve, parking reserve, but maybe as you're amending those policies, maybe just have a skim through these and just, you know, it wouldn't hurt to come back and challenge this council when you bring it. You know, if there's some sort of rationales that aren't like, maybe there was a good reason for it at the time, in the moment, but, you know, if you see something there, come back and say, you know, this may or may not actually make sense, you know, or just give a little brief. It doesn't hurt
Well,
for us to revisit these.
I would say that that review is what's gone into this
All right.
discussion today.
Well, we didn't really talk much about, for example, the industrial park one and, you know, so.
Right, and because that was relatively recent direction in a motion from council, I didn't consider that there might already want to be changes there.
Well, who knows?
If, as a body council, wanted to make those changes, I would probably defer to someone who's more familiar with procedures for how to undo motions that have been done.
Well, I wasn't there, I was there, but I don't even remember what our thinking was on that day. Maybe Councillor Church does.
Recollect, I think it was, there was some sentiment around the council table that they didn't want other funds going into the landfill for an industrial park. They wanted to keep it very specific. So if you generate money by selling lots, you invest that money back into it. I think it was to keep it separate, because there was a bit of sentiment that maybe this isn't where we should be investing money.
I do recall that discussion, because I think I might have been pushing that.
You might have been the one.
I might have been involved, but I remember challenging, like, is this a good business for us to even be in, you know, because we've been at it for whatever, say, almost 30 years, and we haven't had a lot of uptake. Maybe this isn't a good business for us to be in, and then maybe that's how this came to be, and so we said, okay, well, then we're not gonna put any more money in, but you know, future councils probably won't have the benefit of that history, so like, they'll just see it as a funny little bucket there, and they'll still put from, you know, please.
Unless we put parameters on it to say specifically, you know, money from the sale of property and whatever goes back into this fund, and that's what we use.
And that's
what it is.
that is, but
But-
it doesn't exclude you from going to other buckets.
No, it doesn't.
And that's the key thing, so now we have this funny little bucket there, and the context is lost, so it's like, oh yeah, you can take from that, because we have this proceeds of land sales, but if the need to expand or whatever exceeded what's in that bucket, we would just turn to another bucket and grab some anyway, so then what's the point of having it in its own special little bucket?
But to be fair, we do that not just for this specific one. We do that for whatever requests come in. We try to find if we don't have the funds left in one fund, we try to figure it out and find it.
Yeah, I think, Ed, but what drove us to this, I think thank you for refreshing my memory, is that it was this questioning whether this is something, if it's not gonna eventually self-sustain, do we want to even continue pushing down the road, because then, you know, you're just throwing money and hoping to have a success story. At some point, if you were in the private sector and you had something for sale and nobody's buying, at some point you'd stop trying to do that business. Councillor Asif.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just thinking, if you take this reserve away and just add whatever's in that reserve in your budget in the capital budget.
Goes to capital.
So in capital, yeah, because, I mean, obviously, if we need to put a road out there to bring it we'll do it. So, I mean, I agree with the deputy warden that, you know.
Close it out, yeah.
Close it. I mean, you're the guy that knows, the less work you don't want to deal with 75,000 accounts as a.
No,
staff.
74.5 is the max I want to do.
But I think this is on the right path, and to go through this is, you know, ahead of time and place. I think it's time we streamlined a little bit. And I can understand reserves. I mean, they're great to have reserves,
Somehow this
but
came from it, but I don't think this is really the outcome.
this particular one to me, seems like we can, whatever we have to do to just to get rid of it.
I think, you know, as I'm trying to remember, because I'm so bad at remembering, but with Councillor Church's help, it's coming together. Yes, I remember we had quite a.
You drove that discussion.
Yes, and we had quite a good discussion about whether we want this to be something that we continue to push as like, do we want to keep trying to invest and trying to attract, because I think there was at the time talk of marketing and.
Yeah, we did some.
And it was all this stuff, and it's like, oh, we're gonna try this one last quote, like let's try this, maybe that'll, yeah, and, you know, at some point, you know, it didn't make sense, and this was what was born from that. It's like, okay, then if we sell lots, then we're gonna create this thing, but then it doesn't have it's not like if, let's say in 5 years, there's a new council here, and there was a proposal to do marketing or to put new roads or whatever, and it exceeded what's in this bucket, I don't think that future council would then have the luxury or understanding that development out there is supposed to be like sort of pinned down by what it can self-sustain. I don't think that exists, and if it, as Councilor Asif said, you know, if it cost more, we might do it, and then in which case, then why have the reserve? Like that was the point of it, is that we wanted to sort of say, like, at some point, project, you have to, like a little bird, you gotta fly, you know, you have to self-sustain. And if it's not going to, then maybe we turn our attentions elsewhere. We'll find other land, we'll do a different type of business park somewhere if that's something we wanna do, or we just, you know, we'll sell lots as we have them, and if it comes along, great, but in terms of new investment, we're not going to. That's a broader discussion, which it sounds like we sort of had back in 2023. Because there's a lengthy history of us spending a lot of money to get to this point in hopes that we'll create a bit of a park there, but we haven't had a lot of uptake. So anyways, that's what I remember about this, so that it does call into question this reserve, I think.
Put it in the capital reserve. It's all the same. You can still use it for the same purpose.
What does the rest of the committee think as well? So Warden Weber is in favor of just throwing it in capital. What about the rest of yous? I'm reading the body language here. No, Councilor Church.
I'm okay with that, but I also hope that if an opportunity did come up, that we will have the will to do something if it's beneficial, like we need to put a road in, that we're going to do it, saying, oh no, we have no reserve, so we're not going to do it.
Yeah, and we might need staff to come back so that future councils or future, oh, please. Yeah, you do, all right, fine.
Yeah, I would.
There you go.
We do have a plan, so in March, our Senior Economic Development Officer came back to council with a development plan for the industrial park. And council did approve the plan with the, under the condition that staff would come back in 2028 with a decision point at that juncture to determine whether or not future investment would go into the park or future planning for marketing and advertising. So that will be coming back to
In
council.
2028,
Yep.
ooh, that's out there.
So the next, or one of the next items in the plan is to contract with a commercial or an industrial realtor, and that is out right now for quotes, a request for quotes, which won't cost us additional funds in order for them to promote the park. They would just be paid based on sales, actual lot sales, so that is
That's good.
in motion right now, so.
Yeah, I think that if we're thinking of it from a business standpoint, you know, then whether it's that we have a special reserve or not, it doesn't matter. Like, we're just looking for a return, an ROI, or a return on this investment. I think for a long time, there was a lot of investment made in hopes. And I think that was where the frustration maybe in 2023 came out, is like they just keep coming back looking more and more and more, but without the expectation of the return. And, okay, sounds good. And I have Councilor Bremner wanting to weigh in here.
Thank you, Deputy Warden. I think this again shows the importance of our decision-making, our changes we have to do, our ability to be accountable for the development of our municipality. We're growing, we're changing, views are changing, input by many people is very important, and we have to make the tough decisions. But if we don't look at these things from all angles at some point, we are going to go back to this rut of doing things just to keep paperwork flowing, and it's just, we need to streamline. This is an important phase. This is an important time in our changing of our municipality. And folks, the growth strategy and the growth process is going to change how we did things in the past. So I really do believe we are more ready and have to be ready to deal with the things that sometimes we just piled in paper and piled in places, and we have to structure that better and do a better job at it. Thank you.
Yeah, I think the lesson I take away from this small example of this industrial park reserve is that the importance of, if we're gonna make a decision, and in the underlying philosophy was we wanna have a business case for what we wanna do out there, then that has to be somehow embodied in our decision, so that future, even, we're only one council further, and we've already lost the context of how we arrived at this industrial park reserve. It took us probably 10 minutes to collectively realize how this came to be. And, you know, if we were one council further than that, then it would be like just confusion on why this exists. So, you know, I see, you know, maybe we'll have to, as we make these decisions in the future, make sure that we create a bit of policy around, not the reserve, but around our efforts at Kaiser Meadow, so that future, like staff, as they inform future councils, can bring that history piece and how we arrived here. It's really important.
Just put it in the regular capital reserve.
So, yeah, so that we're gonna delete that reserve, it sounds like, or you're gonna bring a proposal to delete it, I guess.
Yeah, I'll bring back a draft that amongst all the changes we've talked about, so, you know, merging the rec reserve into the parkland reserve, merging the FHCS equipment reserve and the industrial park development reserve into the general capital, and the other stuff we've talked about today.
This is why we love having you, Tim, because
This
you
is why I
you
wanted
make
to
the
have this
meeting so
conversation.
exciting.
Yeah, most people find reserves boring, but you guys make it exciting, thank you. Appreciate it.
Without them, we wouldn't be doing that.
All right.
All right, is there any other topics, feedback, pieces on the matrix you have any questions about or concerns? Excellent, well, that's some great feedback, thank you very much.
Thank you. Well, those were our two topics for today. I think that's it then. So, so moved.